What's up, MTG Burgeoning Community YouTube viewing audience? If you are part of the latter and wish to join the former, click that subscribe button now, and in so doing, you become eligible for all of this channel's sweet rewards. In today's Build a Deck Tuesday video, we are introducing our new General Commander, Lord Windgrace. Alright, what's up, MTG Burgeoning fans? Here we go. We're back on Build a Deck Tuesday, and today we are going to introduce Lord Windgrace. That's right, folks. Lord Windgrace can be our commander. We are building an EDH commander deck with a Planeswalker as our general commander. So let's introduce Lord Windgrace. He's a Planeswalker that costs 2 and a Jund, which is black, red, and green. He comes into play with 5 loyalty counters. We can add 2 loyalty counters to discard a card, then draw a card. If we discard a land, we can draw an additional card. We can -3 Lord Windgrace to return up to 2 target lands from our graveyard to the battlefield. And if we are fortunate enough to utilize his big ability of -11, we destroy up to 6 target non-land permanents, then create 6 2/2 green cat warrior creature tokens with Forest Walk. So this is kind of a milestone here for MTG Burgeoning. This will be the first commander deck that I have where the Planeswalker is going to act as our general. And Jund is a great way to go about it. So let's build a Jund Land Matters EDH commander deck with Lord Windgrace as our general. So, as is customary here during our Build a Deck Tuesday series, we have our general commander in the first video, and then we introduce the first dozen or so cards that are going to act as the core of this deck. So let's get started right away with Lotus Cobra. This reprint from Zendikar Rising, originally printed in Zendikar. So one was a 1 and a green, a 2/1 snake with the landfall mechanic. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under our control, we add 1 mana of any color. We're going to have lots and lots of lands entering the battlefield in a lot of different ways, and having Lotus Cobra as our first card in the 99 is going to be very beneficial, because honestly, if we put a land into play untapped, we're generally getting that mana and tapping that land for a mana, so we're really getting 2 per land when Lotus Cobra is in play. And we have some ways in which of, increasing that, but more on that to come. So card number 1 in the 99, Lotus Cobra. Edition number 1. Number 2, staying on theme with Zendikar Rising, Skeet Swarm. 2 and a green, it's a 1/1 insect with, again, the landfall mechanic. The landfall mechanic in the early going of this deck and throughout subsequent videos of this series should not come as a surprise. So Skeet Swarm, 2 and a green for a 1/1 insect, and whenever a land enters the battlefield under our control, we create a 1/1 green insect creature token. If we control 6 or more lands, create a token that's a copy of Skeet Swarm instead. Anyone that is in the current working knowledge of the Zendikar Rising standard environment with Skeet Swarm and how out of control it could get with lands coming into play from everywhere, multiple lands per turn. If we are able to activate Skeet Swarm with at least 6 lands in play and continuously duplicate Skeet Swarm after Skeet Swarm after Skeet Swarm, it's only a matter of time until we have such an army. We should be able to wipe the entire table right out. So card number 2 of the 99 is Skeet Swarm. Staying on theme once more, staying in Zendikar Rising and with another landfall mechanic, we have Morag, Fury of Akum. For 4 and 2 red, we've got a 6/6 legendary Minotaur Warrior. Each creature we control gets +1/+0 for each time it has attacked this turn. Its landfall mechanic says whenever a land enters the battlefield under our control, if it's our pre-combat main phase, There's an additional combat phase after this phase. At the beginning of that combat, untap all creatures you control. So as long as we put 2, 3, maybe 4 lands into play during our first main phase, we're going to have 3, 4 additional combat phases after our initial combat phase. And each time our creatures attack, they're going to get +1/+0, then another +1/+0, and then another +1/+0. So you can see as we slide Morag to the right a little bit, highlighting Skeet Swarm there down on the doubling season mat, you can see that by amassing a Skeet Swarm army, having Morag in play, getting a bunch of lands into play, can create quite an army to wipe our opponents right off the board, right off the table. All right, card number 4. Another landfall card, another card from Zendikar Rising. Here we have Velik Exploration. For 2 and a red, this enchantment has the landfall mechanic. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under our control, we exile the top card of our library. We may play that card for as long as it remains exiled. Then at the beginning of our end step, if there are cards exiled with Velik Exploration, we can put them into their owner's graveyard. Then Velik Exploration deals that much damage to each opponent. So let's say for a turn we have Velik Exploration in play, we drop down 4 lands, we exile 4 cards, we don't cast any of them, then at the end step they go to the graveyard and we deal 4 points of damage to each opponent. So moving down the mode of thinking here as we continue to fill the 99 in future videos, we'll keep it in mind to have some graveyard cards that can help us get some of those cards out of the graveyard and into our hand or onto the battlefield. But Velik Exploration is important. I think it's going to be a significant card here because it does deal damage to each opponent. If it were target opponent, don't think it would be that valuable. But as it is, Velik Exploration is card number 4. All right. Next up, card number 5, staying on theme with landfall. We have Omnath, Locus of Rage. 3 double red and double green. This mythic rare from Battle for Zendikar is a 5/5 legendary elemental. And its landfall trigger is whenever a land enters the battlefield under our control, we create a 5/5 red and green elemental creature token. And then whenever Omnath, Locus of Rage, or another elemental we control dies, Omnath deals 3 damage to any target. So similar to what we were talking about with Morag, with Skeet Swarm, if we are having some turns where we're putting more and more lands into play, creating more and more elementals, and then we have Morag in play, and then we put more lands into play and have multiple combat phases, these elementals that are 5/5, first combat phase, they're getting +1/+0, they become 6/5, then 7/5, then 8/5. So Omnath, Locus of Rage, when paired with Skeet Swarm and Morag, is going to help us amass our army so that we can attack and eliminate our EDH opponents. All right, hitting the halfway point of this initial Lord Windgrace EDH commander build, we have another landfall creature and another one that's going to create us some tokens. Rampaging Bailouts. 4 and 2 green, it's a 6/6 trample, and when a land enters the battlefield under our control, we create a 4/4 green beast creature token. So Skeet Swarm, Omnath, Rampaging Bailouts, with our lands coming into play, they're the creatures that's going to create our tokens in order to give us one of our avenues to victory. All right, so we're halfway through. Next up, we have a great addition to this deck. It doesn't have the quote-unquote landfall mechanic. That's just because it wasn't a mechanic that was identified in the series. And that's going to be Tireless Tracker. So this rare from Shadows over Innistrad is 2 and a green for a 3/2 human scout, and when a land enters the battlefield under our control, which is landfall, we get to investigate. And to investigate, we create a colorless clue artifact token that we can tap to, sacrifice to draw a card. And whenever we sacrifice a clue, we can put a +1/+1 counter on Tireless Tracker. So with the number of lands that are going to be going into play throughout the game with this deck, it'll be nice to have Tireless Tracker out there giving us a form of card draw in the form of clues. Tireless Tracker is card number 7. All right, rounding out the top 2/3 of this first video, We have Avenger of Zendikar. 5 and 2 green. We got a 5/5 elemental creature that whenever it comes into play, we create a 0/1 green plant creature token for each land we control. So now we're shifting a little bit more into the lands matter theme, as we've already shown that the first 7 cards are very, very high efficiency for landfall mechanics. Not that the landfall mechanic for Avenger of Zendikar should be overlooked, because whenever a land enters the battlefield under our control, we can put a +1/+1 counter on each plant creature we control. And again, we're going to be creating this deck in a way that puts a lot of lands onto the battlefield throughout the entire course of the game. So Avenger of Zendikar comes in at number 8. All right, so number 9, and now we're shifting away from our landfall mechanics into a little bit more of how are we going to get some lands into play in order to trigger our landfall creatures. And the first card that we're going to include is going to be Scape Shift. 2 and 2 green, we can sacrifice any number of lands and then search our library for that many land cards, put them into play tapped, then shuffle our library. This is fantastic because we can sacrifice any number of lands and put those many into play, triggering our Lotus Cobra, our Skeet Mob, our Morag, triggering Velik Omnath, and the Ramp. I mean, we can trigger any one of those cards that are down there, any one of those 8 by casting a Scape Shift. So Scape Shift is too valuable of a card in this type of builds to not include. All right, so when we are sacrificing those creatures when we are sacrificing those lands in order to cast Scape Shift, let's find a couple ways to get those lands out of the graveyard and into play, or at least back into our hands. And one of those ways will be Crucible of Worlds. This artifact that costs 3 lets us play land cards from our graveyard. So we cast our Scape Shift, we sacrifice 5-6 lands, we have Crucible of Worlds in play. We can play those sacrificed lands from our graveyard right back into play. Bonus if those lands are cards like Fabled Passage, Prismatic Vista, or a fetch land where we can put a land into play from the graveyard, sacrifice it, get a land from our library, put that onto the battlefield, thereby getting 2 landfall triggers just by playing one of those lands from the graveyard. Crucible of Worlds is card number 10. Card number 11, again having to deal with some graveyard shenanigans, is going to be Life from the Loam. 1 and a green, we can return up to 3 target land cards from our graveyard to our hand, which is fantastic because we're also going to eventually include a lot of spells that permit us to play more than 1 land per turn. Life from the Loam also has the Dredge mechanic. It has Dredge 3, so if we were to draw a card, instead we may put exactly 3 cards from the top of our library into our graveyard. If we do this, then we return from the graveyard to our hand. Then if we do that, we return Life from the Loam from the graveyard to our hand, and if we don't do it, then we just draw a card. So Life from the Loam can act as a way in which to get lands out of the graveyard into our hand, or from our library into the graveyard. All the while understanding that as we shift the card to the left, we've got Crucible of Worlds waiting right there to play those lands from our graveyard as well. All right, those are the first 11. This is the last card, and we're going back from where we started. We're going back to Zendikar Rising. This is for a card that is just going to make this deck so much stronger. And that card is Ancient Green Warden. 4 and 2 green, it's a 5/7 elemental with reach. We may play land cards from our graveyard, so it has a Crucible of Worlds built into it, but it's the next wall of text that is even more important, even more powerful. If a land entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent we control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So Ancient Green Warden gives us a Crucible of Worlds effect, and it lets us double any landfall triggers. So if we just shift Ancient Green Warden to the right here for a moment, looking down at some of the creatures, some of the spells that we have that have landfall right now, not spells, yeah, because the Velik on the enchantment, You look at Skeet Swarm, you look at Tireless Tracker, you look at Omnath, Locus of Rage, Morag. If a land comes into play, it's going to double each of those landfall triggers. Ancient Green Warden is going to be the sneaky card that makes this deck extremely powerful. And there we have it, Burgeoning fans. These are the first 12 cards to include in our Juned Lord Windgrace Lands Matter deck. The next set of cards, you can leave these suggestions in the comment section below. Now we want to get some cards that lets us get as many lands into play as possible. Can we get, cards that say you may play an extra land? Cards that say, play another land from your graveyard. We want as many ways in which to get extra lands into play during our turn as possible. Leave up to 12 suggestions for these cards in the comment section below. This is MTG Burgeoning, folks. This is Build the Deck Tuesday, and we are building a Land Matters deck with Lord Windgrace.